They have different constraints because the country is so small, right? It's 720 something square kilometers. That's half the size of Houston. And there's no open airspaces. And there's, the CTR of the airport itself covers a lot of the area. So obviously the constraints and thought are different because there's dense population everywhere.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 285. What role can autonomous drones play in urban areas? For that question, we head to Israel and speak with Ron Krauss, CEO and co-founder of Airobotics, a global leader in fully automated industrial drones. The company has developed a pilotless drone solution, the first of its kind in the global market. Its industrial-grade platform is available on-site and on-demand, enabling industrial facilities to access premium aerial data in a faster, safer, more efficient way. In May, the company received the world's first approval to fly over a major metropolis. The Home Team Science and Technology Agency of Singapore uses Airobotics' cutting-edge drone technology to augment Singapore's police force by providing real-time aerial data delivered by automated drone technology. 2 pilotless aerobatic drones are used by the police force to track illegal public gatherings and enforce social distancing measures. Singapore is one of the most densely populated urban centers in the world. Ran is a leader and influencer in the drone industry, working at the intersection of robotics, practical aviation, and drone flight. He is the first licensed commercial UAV pilot in Israel, having assisted the Civil Aviation Authority in Israel to establish regulation for commercial UAV operation. Ran previously co-founded 2 successful drone companies, Parazero, which builds ballistic parachutes for drones, and Bladeworks, the first company to receive a commercial UAS operator license from the Israeli Civil Aviation Authority. In this edition of the Drone Radio Show, Ran talks about Airobotics, the opportunity that autonomous drone solutions can deliver, and the challenges of providing such solutions in urban environments. But before we hear from Ran, I want to thank those of you who are supporting my funding campaign. Whether it's $1, $100, or much more, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. Go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And by the way, if you have an idea for a great show and want to share your experience, please contact me at randy@droneradioshow.com. So let's learn how autonomous drones can operate in cities with Ran Krauss of Airobotics. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Ran to introduce himself.
Okay, so hi, my name is Ron Krauss. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Airobotics.
Ran, what is Airobotics?
Airobotics is a company that developed the first drone in a box kind of concept. This was about 6 years ago. And we launched off after starting 2 additional companies in the space. I was fortunate enough to be the first licensed commercial UAV pilot in Israel. Then started the company called Bladeworks, which was the first commercial UAV operator in Israel. Then started Parazero, develops pyrotechnic parachute systems for drones. Then started Airobotics, where the fundamental thought behind the company was to create a fully automated drone operation. So we've built a technology that enables that, includes a top-of-the-class drone, but a docking station that's very capable also in terms of being able to replace batteries and payloads.
What's the target market for the company?
Well, that's varied. We service many different clients, starting from police forces. We do a bit of homeland security, oil and gas, heavy industries, that sort.
What makes Airobotics different from other companies in the autonomous drone space?
Well, I think we have a holistic approach toward this business. We believe that building the hardware is not sufficient. There's 3 main pillars we work with. First is the technology itself, the hardware mostly. Second is the regulation, and third is the operation. And we believe you need all three to pull it off. And I think that's one of our strongest differentiators, on top of the fact that I think we're much ahead of the curve when it comes to all three. So from the technology aspect, this is probably the most robust, capable system out there. We've just finalized 3 months of continuous operations, over 1,000 flights in 3 months in the heart of Singapore, which was the first time that multi-rotors were allowed to fly over significantly dense areas of population. And that includes flying a lot and also dealing with weather. So I think in terms of proper capabilities from a robustness and durability standpoint, but also having a robotic arm inside the docking station and enable us to fly with different payloads. So on that aspect, I think we're definitely ahead of the gang. And on the regulation aspect, we've received most of the world's first in this domain, including an upcoming type certificate, hopefully from the FAA very shortly.
I have a couple of follow-up questions. First, what's the docking arm used for?
So first, it's used to replace batteries. So you're able to land the aircraft automatically and then replace a battery and fly out again. So there's no charging or standby time in that sense. But also, we're able to replace the payloads, which is extremely significant because in our mind, the whole idea of flying a drone for professional purposes is to carry a specific payload to a specific location. If you're able to replace that payload, you become a multi-tool. And that is a strong suit that we have and not many others have.
On the regulatory side, what do you have to comply with to get approval in the countries that Airobotics operates?
So I think the most significant thing is, to prove your airworthiness. I'm a fan of DJI. I think it's an amazing company, but there is a differentiation when you look at this tool as a proper aircraft from a regulatory perspective and airworthiness perspective, right? So a balsa aircraft with a GoPro is not a Predator, although they serve the same function. But if you want to be able to fly in complex environments over people, etc., you need proper airworthiness certification, which is pretty difficult to get because you need to withhold standards that are very close to the manned aircraft standards needed. So the entire development process, the entire test flight and operations aspect, referred to as ConOps, is very, very difficult to get.
Did you set out to establish your own standards for what it was that you wanted to prove to the regulatory bodies? Or were you following other standards?
It was a joint cooperation with most of the regulatory bodies, trying to figure out together how to find the right path forward when it comes to evaluating the airworthiness of these aircrafts. So I would say it's a mix. It was a working process for a very long time with these authorities.
What's the most challenging part in demonstrating to authorities that Airobotics was reliable and could fly safe?
That includes a lot of things. Just for example, we've filed over 10,000 pages of documentation for review, and that consists of lab tests, flight hours that need to be accumulated, likely failure tests, and many others. It takes years, and it's a proper aircraft evaluation process from the FAA. So I don't think there's one specific point, but the whole process as a whole is very professional and very difficult to adhere to.
Does Airobotics manufacture all of its components?
95%, I would say.
Tell us about the software platform.
There's the software component that's relevant for the flight operations, but there's also a part of the software called Insightful, where it's basically the data platform that the information is then presented in, right? So those are two different aspects of software. We do both, but they're both equally important because at the end of the day, this might be cool technology, but in terms of business case, you need to be able to provide insights for the customers. I mean, they don't really care about the drone in the box. What they care about is being able to create a business case around it and proof point that. And that always has to do with the data gathered and the data analyzed. So in a sense, the information platform that we have, it's called Insightful, is used to do just that.
Generally speaking, what do customers want out of an autonomous system?
I think it's still a work in progress in a lot of sense, but we are discovering that there are, especially in the urban environments where we are heading, and that's our point of interest, there's a lot of different applications that this tool can do. So there's no one thing. But there's a lot of things that specifically our aircraft could do, because it could fly electro-optical sensors, it could fly infrared sensors, it could fly LiDAR sensors. And that ability enables you to create a very holistic digital representation of the environment. And then that goes into multiple applications that either be pointed towards commercial entities, whether it's insurance companies, construction companies, utility companies, or pointed at the government/municipality. And they could use that so-called digital twin to do various things with.
Do you feel your potential clients are aware of the benefits of drones, or are you having to educate them on the possibilities?
Well, that depends. I think most of the clients are aware today what a drone can do, and in opposition to where the market was 4 or 5 years ago, nobody actually understood what the benefit of a drone is, period. I think we've matured from that stage, and people understand what are the benefits of the common drone. And most of them are also making use of such drones. But on the other hand, there's definitely a process of market education and trial and error for customers to understand what the benefits of the system are. Now, having said that, I think the drone market as a whole has went through a typical yet extreme hype cycle that is similar to many other innovative technologies, in the sense that, a new technology emerges, there's a lot of excitement, a lot of anticipation, then usually reality sets in. And I think that was even a more severe cycle with drones. Not a lot of exits, not a lot of companies that could be defined as successful. So I think we're now turning a corner where the hype cycle was pretty extreme. Then the disappointment, quote unquote, from the industry as a whole, both from the investment side, but also from the client side, we're now turning a corner. And the reason I think we're turning that corner is because we're about to enter a new realm in which drones would be able to fly in cities. And I think a lot of the use cases that are extremely relevant for this industry, whether it be package delivery, blood sample delivery, mapping, a lot of these applications will now open up because regulation will enable it. And up until now, that was not the case.
Give us an example.
Most common would be emergency response, right? So imagine there's a fire in the city somewhere. An automated drone could fly there and get there usually within a couple of minutes if it's on standby. And then having that drone transmit live video back to the fire truck before it even gets there. That means a lot. And, when I say mean a lot, I mean in terms of life-saving, right? You ask any firefighter if he gets a bird's eye view, an aerial image live video to the fire truck before he gets to the location, that's extremely helpful dealing with the situation. And that's something we could do pretty easily.
Is the hope that eventually a call comes into a 911 center and the drone is automatically dispatched to the location, maybe even figuring out how to get there on its own?
Yeah, most definitely. That's exactly it. And I think we're closer to that point than we actually think. I mean, we've been experimenting with working in cities for quite a while now. One of the most significant projects is in Singapore, and that's exactly, we're now in the phases of doing exactly that with the police. That's exactly the intention.
Other than the regulatory requirements, what else do you have to consider when working in urban areas?
Well, I kind of related to that in the beginning, saying that we have a more holistic approach when it comes to this operation. And a good example, although it's much more grandiose, would be the autonomous car industry, right? I think everybody understands that building the autonomous car is one aspect of it. Getting that car regulated is a completely different aspect. But that's usually something the manufacturer would go through. But then the operation aspect of it, right? So think of Google's autonomous car, but it needs to be combined with Uber in a way, So that's kind of similar in what we do. And that's why it's important for us to control all three dimensions, which is technology, regulation, and operation, because the regulation and technology may be tied together from an airworthiness perspective, but the regulator also wants to see the concept of operation, of how you plan your flights, how you make sure that the routes that are being chosen from a software perspective and others are the most safe flights, and how the system is triggered and how the system is maintained. So in a way, you have to be all three to pull this off, is what we believe.
Airobotics is based in Israel and does business in other countries. For example, the recent project in Singapore. How complicated is it on your end in working with the various regulatory bodies so that you can operate in different countries easily?
In a sense, we're the trailblazers of this industry, and you could run a quick fact checking on us, but we've invented the category. So that's a plus and a minus. The advantage is obviously we're ahead of the curve, but in a sense, that also means that you need to trailblaze. And I have to say that I was surprised for the best with the regulatory approach worldwide. We're now, specifically talking about the FAA. I was very pleased and surprised in the sense that their ambition and their motivation to push forward this technology is what we're seeing, and might be to the contrary of what other people think. There's some commentary, some, I would say, criticism towards the FAA in a sense where they're not enabling the industry to flourish, because everybody understands in the industry that being able to fly in cities is a strong enabler and the segue for the industry to grow and create more jobs and raise more money and create more applications and business cases. But I don't think that's a fair statement. I think the FAA, on one hand, needs to be responsible for the airspace and the airworthiness of all aircrafts. And doing that is not a simple job. If you compare that to manned aircrafts, no one has criticism there, because if God forbid something happens, like the 737 MAX incident, everybody screams and shouts. But on the other hand, everybody wants to jump ahead of bureaucracy and regulation to get their drones to fly in cities. But that doesn't work that way, right? I have to say I'm very pleased with the FAA's motivation and innovative thought. I think they're extremely interested in enabling this industry to move into the urban environment.
How do the regulatory frameworks compare?
There's a variety of different approaches, but I can see them slowly coming into the same line of thought in a sense. But that really varies, because if you look, for example, into Singapore, which I think, CAS, which is the Singaporean Civil Aviation Authority, they have different constraints because the country is so small, right? It's 720 something square kilometers. That's half the size of Houston. And there is no open airspaces, and there's the CTR of the airport itself covers a lot of the area. So obviously the constraints and thought are different because there's dense population everywhere. So in comparison to somewhere like Australia, where, essentially if you're in the middle of the Pilbara, there's certain things you need to notice and make sure that, you don't interfere with local airspace, but there's no one there for hundreds and hundreds of miles, right? So that obviously affects the regulatory aspect in terms of considerations to enable specific operations.
Does your system have some UTM components embedded in it, or does it rely on some type of air traffic management system that it plugs into?
We don't have an integrated DTM system on our system, but our system, in a way, is its own integrated system. And I'll explain. That means that very soon, as more companies get to a point where they can fly in cities, then there's a set of rules you need to comply with that the FAA is responsible for. And if you don't comply, you don't get regulated, right? So in a sense, that will kind of put the UTM idea into place. But there's no required component at this point that's been asked. So I imagine as more and more companies move into the urban environment, some kind of regulatory frame set for UTM would be needed.
Is there an ideal customer or situation for your system? The size of the company or operation have any bearing on the value that's being derived?
I'm not necessarily sure it has to do with the size of the company. It more has to do, I think, with the type of the industry, right? So construction has its benefits that we're all aware of, and that has a certain frequency, certain application base and use case, right? And then the municipality itself might have a different use case that has to do with, making sure that the infrastructure in the city is well established and making sure that everything's compliant to what the city thinks it has. But as a general statement, I would say that anything that is outdoors has moving parts and significant capex or opex are invested, would probably think that would be the common ground, common base for customers that are relevant to use this solution. And the reason for that is that in opposition to most businesses out there that are usually software based today, whether it's a business that runs apps or websites or software, the feedback loop on what happens in the business of the operation is imminent and pretty easy to create, right? If you run a website, you know exactly how many users, where they're from, how long they're spending on your platform, et cetera, et cetera. If you're running an outdoor operation like oil and gas refinery or a construction site, the collection of information and closing that loop becomes much more difficult. And we think that the difficult and challenging layer is the data collection aspect, because once the data is collected, then analyzing it, comparing it, collaborating with it is relatively easy.
What do you see as being the big opportunities in the next few years?
I think we're on the cusp of drone being untethered, both figuratively and literally, meaning that I think a lot of the interesting use cases, valuable use cases are in the urban environment. And I think once regulation is set forth, we're going to see a lot of use cases that, become very relevant. Hopefully, there's companies that go into the space, raise funds, and progress the industry. That's what we all want. I mean, the market is big enough for many, many companies to be successful, and I think that would be a good thing for the industry as a whole. So I would say that being able to match regulation or adhere to the regulation from an airworthiness perspective is probably the most significant challenge. I think the industry as a whole is still in a way looking for proper product market fit areas to work in. I mean, we've seen drones very successful, extremely successful from on a consumer, semi-professional outlook. DJI is obviously an extremely successful company. I think they kind of single-handedly took over this cinematography sector, which I think there's no doubt that the product market fit there is excellent, right? But that's one use case. Other than that, companies here and there that, maybe for a little bit of mapping, maybe some video, maybe a bit of inspection, maybe a little bit of defense use, tactical. But we haven't seen another vector of drones explode yet in the way that the cinematography exploded with DJI. And I think that the product market fit and the area to get the industry there is the urban environment.
Now, Airobotics is your third business. How does this company compare with the others in terms of the challenge and the opportunity?
We started the first company in Israel, roughly 10 years ago, right? Aircraft flew for somewhere between 4 and 6 minutes, and 50% of flights ended with a malfunction. So it was a very different environment. Nobody knew what this aircraft was. Technology was not 100% mature enough. Definitely the market was not educated enough to kind of progress the tech. So I think we're in very different times right now, right? We did sell the first company, and the second company went through a small IPO in Australia. But, I think the industry needed those 10 years to mature. And I think we're now, again, getting closer to seeing what was once considered hype for drones as reality.
Based on your experience, what advice would you give to other entrepreneurs?
I think that starting from the problem you're trying to solve is the most important aspect of it, right? I mean, one of the pitfalls in this industry is that it's very sexy. From the aircraft perspective, there's a lot of people who enjoy the occupation of being drone pilots, which is great. I think, that enthusiasm is definitely needed to push the industry forward. But from a business standpoint, I would focus on finding the specific application that makes economic sense for you. That's probably the most important thing.
Ran, is there anything that we missed that we should talk about?
So I think generally, I'm excited. I'm proud to be part of this industry. I'm proud to be in the space relatively from the start. Most of my adult life has been spent in this zone, and I'm happy about it. I still like it, still love it, still excited about it. I'm even more excited about the future. I think next 10 years for drones are going to be very, very interesting.
And for my final question, Ran, what message would you like to leave regarding the drone industry, and more specifically, autonomous drone systems?
I think there might be some fear in the general public from drones. And as I always say, there's no good or bad technology, right? There's good or bad people. I think this technology can help humanity in a lot of ways. and save lives and do a lot of important things. And that's why I'm excited to be a part of this revolution, to try and be the trailblazers of it as a company, because I believe this technology is valuable. And it's just, I think that public perception, mostly based maybe, on Hollywood films where Terminator and others, flying robots were always considered to be something bad from science fiction, right? And I think that's a misconception. I think that once a drone comes in and, delivers a defibrillator to someone having a heart attack, public perception will change pretty quickly. And once that drone helps put out a fire and save someone in a burning building, then public perception needs to change around that as well. So, I think this technology is great, and I trust the responsible people in the government to make sure that it's used for the right purposes. So I'm excited to see that happen.
That's it for episode 285 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Rand Krauss of Airobotics. I want to thank Rand for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about Airobotics or want to connect with Rand, check out the webpage at airoboticsdrones.com. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Gores.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.